So today I will be presenting a work in progress. It's titled Gender Effects of Climate Shocks on Labor and Welfare in Zambia. This is a joint work with Patricia Justino, Gabriel Montero, Rodrigo Oliveira, and Bruce Sionenka. So we will be very grateful for any feedback or comment that you might have. So thanks in advance for that. As part of the motivation of this paper, and as we have seen in some other sessions, climate change is already increasing. It poses a really huge risk, and this type of exposure might be affecting especially developing economies. And despite of this fact and this increasing risk, there's still very limited evidence, especially causal evidence, on how these extreme shocks might be affecting labor supply, income, and consumption. And the focus of this paper, on top of that, is trying to understand if these extreme shocks might be also differentiated by gender. Now, having this very brief perspective, I would like to focus on the context of a particular developing economy. In Zambia, which is a low middle-income country, where with data from 2024, we have 60% of the population below the poverty line. Due to the fact that it's a very agricultural-driven economy, it has a high vulnerability in terms of droughts and floods and this type of climate shocks. A brief perspective in terms of the labor market for this country, we have 60% of the population in the labor force, 40% out, and the differentiation between men and women is women are more likely to be outside of the labor force than men. As many other developing economies, we also have the informality, it's very prevalent. A brief snapshot about the economy in Zambia and why this might be very vulnerable in the particular shock that we want to study. If we, for example, focus on food consumption and we look at the food basket per capita in Zambia, we have here some graphs where we try to plot the monthly household food consumption per capita. And if we draw a line of where is the food basket per capita, which is around 250 in the local currency, we find that 50% of the households fall below the basic food basket. And these are very recent information in terms of the data set for 2021 and 2022 and 2014 and 15. In terms of the background and literature, there is already papers looking at the gender climate impacts in low-income countries. We already have information about India and other study on Africa and also in Brazil. But still, in this particular context, we have very limited data, and therefore we believe that it's a contribution in trying to provide more information on how this shock might be affecting labor market with differentiated effects in gender. So this study will try to use quasi-experimental variation in terms of climate shocks and how this might be affecting labor supply and consumption using information from the Labor Force Survey and the Consumption Measurement Survey. The research questions that we want to address here is whether the effects of extreme weather events can affect labor market participation, if there is any difference between men and women. If that's the case, we want to understand how it might affect welfare of the households by looking at income and also consumption. And finally, we want to understand how and if social protection might be playing an important mitigating role as a potential buffer of these negative effects. The data sources that we will be using is the Labor Force Survey. We have information, it's a cross-sectional survey from 2017 to 2021, where we have access. It's national representative, and there's a lot of outcomes related to labor force, occupation sector, hours work, etc. We have information at the district level, and we also have information of the quarter of interview. In terms of the living conditions monitoring survey, we only have 2 surveys of dataset for 2015 and 2022, and there is much more rich information in terms of household expenditures and food consumption, as well as social protection programs and the participation of the household members. For the climate variables, we use historical data on temperature and precipitation. For the temperature, we use daily mean information, and that it's later on aggregated at the month level. And we then later match this with the district information of the country. And for the precipitation, we use monthly rainfall data, which is also aligned to the district information of the country. The identification of our shocks will be extreme. So for the labor force survey, and I am making this distinction due to the type of information of the date of interview. For the labor force survey, what we will do is to create a dummy variable for extreme event in terms of weather conditions if the temperature or rainfall is falling in the top or bottom 10 percentile or the 19 percentile and the past year quarter of interview with respect to the study period. So this is between 2017 and 2022. For the condition measurement survey, what we will do is, again, define an extreme event, but with respect to the past month or past growing season. This is because this particular survey, it's only interviewing households in 2 or 3 months during the year. Here on this slide, what we can see is how the climate data is looking between when we focus on temperature and rainfall. What we can see is there is a lot of geographical variation in terms of how the many different districts here on this border are facing much higher temperatures, and on the other side, what we find is like the darker spots or like the darker blue shades are facing very high levels of rainfall. Briefly, in terms of the empirical strategy for the labor outcomes, we will use a fixed effects model. We are focusing on labor outcomes for the individual living in a particular district in a given time period. And we have the temperature and climate shocks defined as extremes in the top and bottom percentiles. We are also including controls and covariates, and we use a fixed effect approach by including the district's control and the quarter of interview or the year and month of interview controls. When we look at the welfare outcomes, we will also be trying to understand how the average effect might be playing a different role in terms of the distribution. So main results, what we found is that the extreme rainfall or like a very high levels of temperature, it's actually reducing labor force participation by 3 percentage points. I will talk a bit of a few of these results, and then we can maybe discuss this on the Q&A, the additional outcomes. And then when we look at the gender impacts or the gender differentiated impacts, what we found here is that female individuals are actually, after a climate shock, are more likely to exit the labor force market. Men are more likely to shift informal sector. And then we have some evidence that women are more likely to move between sectors towards a more service-oriented sector, and men are more likely to stay in the manufacturing sector. So what we see here is there is a structure change or a shift between the structure of the employment in this data set. What happens when we look at income and consumption? Food consumption per capita falls with extreme rainfall or with extreme heat or extreme temperatures. But when we look at the distribution of the food consumption, what we see is that the poorer households, those which are located in the bottom quantiles of the distribution of the food consumption, are actually those who are more affected. And we can see this when we look at the bottom and the top, the more extreme and the less extreme shocks in terms of rainfall. And this result is actually consistent when we divided whether the households are female-headed or not. What happened now with social protection? Very briefly, this is a snapshot of the coverage. According to, for example, the labor force survey, for those who are interviewed, only 7% of the rural population is survey or replying that they have any social protection benefit, and only 2% of the urban population. Out of these beneficiaries, the ones who are saying that they receive the most is the social cash transfer program, which is an unconditional program. And the coverage varies a lot between districts, but we mainly see that the recipients are located in the more urban areas, such as Lusaka and Copperbelt. So when we try to understand how social protection might be playing a mitigating role for these extreme weather shocks, what we find is that there is a suggestive evidence that rainfall shock is actually, that the targeting of the social protection programs might be in districts which are more likely to be affected by these rainfall shocks, but there is no significant effect that this social protection might have in, for example, food consumption. There is some evidence that it has a mitigating role in income losses, but this effect dissipates after time. In terms of the conclusions of this event, of this study, this is still a work in progress. So what we find is that climate shock is reducing labor force participation. Women are the ones who are most affected. Household food consumption is actually also affected by this type of shocks, and social protection is playing a mitigating role, especially in terms of income, but this effect is dissipating over time. Very briefly, and to finalize, I would like just to have a key takeaways in terms of policy implication. So this is more of an invitation of the designing of climate responsive social protection programs or safety nets that might be able to scale up in the different parts of the country. And also to consider the special angle of how actually women are being more vulnerable to this type of shocks. So the safety nets might be also considering this type of potential consequence in order to have a better welfare effect for the population. So thank you. That's all from my side.